Hello and welcome back to Savage Garden, a podcast delving into all things AMC's Immortal universe, one morsel at a time. We are Kat and Naomi, and today we have finally arrived at the final destination of Interview with a Vampire, because going forwards we've got a name change as we arrive at season 2, episode 8, and that's the end of it. There's nothing else, which is at the time of when we first started this podcast was ranked as number one on IMDb with a score
Yeah.
of 9.3. So that is the last, wait, four episodes have had the top three episodes. Don't Start the Tape was at number three. Last week's episode, I Could Not Prevent It, was number two. And this one is number one. So this kind of feels like this is a show that the fans really grew into and grew with. And
Mm.
then, like, as it progressed, they kind of fell in love with those later episodes a little bit more than the first one. I think sometimes it kind of goes the opposite way, like a series like Lost or something starts really, really strong and then kind of peters out by its like end of season finales. But this seems to have done pretty well. And yeah, we put off last week's episode for quite a while, and this one, I mean, this one also has a scene which we'll get into, which is emotionally devastating. But before that, we have Louis going a little bit John Wick, which makes me very
Mm.
happy. What are your feelings on this episode, Naomi?
So I love this episode. This is probably my favorite. I mean, in terms of those IMDb rankings, I would always have the pilot as the second episode because I think the very first episode is just the most masterful example of how to cram a huge amount of storytelling and a huge amount of very emotional storytelling into one little 50-minute package. But this is such a great, strong episode because we reach effectively the end of Louis' emotional arc that has been set up. We sort of get the point, as it were, of Daniel being here, of the book, as revelation enters the room, and we find out what really happened in Paris at the trial. But again, like the previous episode, it starts in a rough place. We have Louis buried in the rocks, buried in his coffin, screaming, and we get to see in this candlelit crypt all the names of the people that are buried there, including Nicolas de l'Enfant, who we see was only a vampire for 30 years before he went into the fire, which is a very small period of time. It's like from a vampire point of view, he barely got out of his teens after Lestat turned him. And Armand is still telling his fairy story about how, he has been terribly punished by the coven for rescuing Louis by ensuring that he got banishment instead of death. And poor Louis is just withering away from starvation. He's screaming. His slit ankles have healed over, but they've healed over the rocks that are in the coffin, which is a really, really, really unpleasant detail. As is the fact that Louis still has those rocks because he refuses to remove them because he keeps trying to punish himself. And it gives his horrible little Zen garden with the rock, the pebble-based flooring, an entirely different flavor. It's like, well, is this Zen or is this you trying to ground yourself, or is this just you continually punishing yourself and spending all your time steeped in self-loathing? And it is one of my favorite pieces of the script here is where we have Louis talking about, would his life have changed if he had, not taken the sweet, worn the different suit? Would he have been able to resist Lestat on the altar? And he is very honest with himself that the suit changes nothing. And again, he's kissing Lestat on the altar, that there is no world, no life, no fate in which he and Lestat did not become lovers, did not become companions. And I think it's such a beautifully, beautifully performed piece of work by Jacob Anderson. This episode is written purely by Roland Jones, which is rare. and it is directed by my top equal top favorite director, along with Emma Freeman, Levan Aiken, who is, they kind of roll him out for the big guns, don't they? They seem to roll him and
Yeah.
Emma out for the really big episodes. Um, and yeah, we should say that the whole of this episode is beautifully directed, beautifully lit, lots of very good tableaus in terms of where they position people. But yes, when I was watching Jacob do the and the suit changes nothing speech, in a just world, he really should have been laden with every Emmy going. And I don't think he even got nominated for anything, did he? Other than, did he get nominated? No, he didn't even get nominated for a Critics' Choice Award, because the difficulty is he's in the Best Actor category. And if you are drowning in Successions, The Bears, White Lotus, all the rest of it, you don't stand a chance. If all of these categories are now filled with movie stars, which there's been a huge discussion about recently, I mean, look at Scarpetta. It's got Nicole Kidman and Jamie Lee Curtis as the leads. If you are casting movie stars in your limited series, then you're not really the actors that aren't quite of that A-list status are going to really struggle to get the degree of recognition that they need. But yes, we have, as we start, we have poor Louis screaming in his coffin, and a beautiful depiction. Poor, pathetic little Armand. You know,
Yeah.
he's putting people in the rat box. He's wearing scraps. Santiago is in charge. And Armand, I mean, he's only 500 years old. I mean, let's ignore the fact that Santiago has previously been said to be the youngest of the
Yeah.
coven and has about as much power as I do, but Armand couldn't possibly, yeah, he couldn't possibly overpower him. He's just too weak, just too weak, too delicate a soul in his huge, because they've dressed him in all these sequences in these huge black, like black and brown sacks to make Assad Zaman, who isn't actually svelte. This is quite funny. If you see Assad like off screen, he's actually really quite built, but they make him look very svelte. But yeah, it's all wildly entertaining. And in the meantime, you've just got Louis recounting in the present day. And I mean, he's not a world boy. When he says, "Did anyone ever ask Lazarus if he wanted to return?" Whew, Louis, come on. So we have Armand, well, we think it's Armand, rescuing Louis by pouring blood into his coffin, which enables, well, dragging the coffin out and allowing Louis to escape. And he is, at this stage, it should be fair, stark raving mad. He is absolutely nuts. He's planning his great revenge. He's like squirreled away in this sort of warehouse. He's imagining the people that he's killing as he goes as like his, I don't know, confidants in this great big scheme that he has to murder everybody. In the meantime, Armand is just trying to get him to leave Paris, because of course he is. And Louis is having none of it. And when he does finally answer him, he warns Armand, which is quite generous of him. He warns him not to be in the Theatre de Vampire the following night. My favorite thing about all of this retelling is that Daniel is having absolutely fucking none of it.
Yeah.
He's just going, yeah, yeah, right. Let me just continue talking to you while I'm actually going to instant message Raglan James from, is it Jones or James? James, isn't it? James. Yeah. Raglan from the Talamasca, and ask him for the copy of the trial script, because he's not buying Armand shit anymore. And I've always thought that, I mean, again, how did Armand not know about all this? Like, Daniel's mind's not a steel trap.
Yeah.
So I do feel that maybe there was a part of Armand that had just had enough as well. because they've had 77 years of this relationship in which Louis has cheated on him constantly, done, as he put it, his biannual fuck off, tried to commit suicide, and they are enduring in this beige little prison of affection. And maybe Armand's just like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just let this play out, see where it goes. I mean, he's too controlling, but I can't see any other way that he didn't know that Daniel all the way through this. Because Daniel's like the most obvious Pulitzer Prize winning journalist I've ever seen in my entire life. This man is not sneaky. So I can't see that he didn't know that he was, asking for things. I mean, you see the side eye that Armand gives when real Rashid brings in the newspaper that Daniel has asked for. I think he
Yeah.
was just done. He's just like, you know what, fuck it. Let's just mix things up a bit. Let's just see where this goes. And there is this really bizarre climate fight, which I think is really true to Armand, where it's like, oh, well, I had the choice between, my coven of 200 years or Louis. And it's like, if I'm not with him, I'm nothing. I don't think Armand really knows what to do if he's not torturing somebody, bothering somebody, in love with someone. I don't think Armand knows how to just be Armand.
Yeah, I mean, we've all know those people. We all know those people that you have to be in a relationship or doing something because they just can't be alone.
Yeah, and I just don't think that Armand can be alone. He can't be alone with his thoughts. He needs either the adulation and subjugation of the coven, or he needed, I don't know, Claudia, who he never cared for, or he needed Louis, but he can't just be on his own. And then we have an incredibly suicidal Louis looking hot as fuck in his rampage trench coat and rescuing Claudia's diaries before basically burning the place to the ground. And he is not a well lad. My
No.
favorite thing is how Daniel Hart, in his infinite wisdom, soundtracks Louis' rampage with smooth jazz. I mean, I hate jazz. I hate smooth jazz. So it brings this like deeply comedic element to it. And he says that he got 6 of the vampires by fire, 2 by blade, and 1 by a combo. Then he gets rid of Celeste and Estelle with Molotov cocktails attached to their bikes, which
Yes.
is brutal. Just like, bye bye, ladies.
Yes, I do enjoy that. Before that, though, they don't know who's attacking them. They
Mm,
don't have any clue, and we get because obviously this transmitted pre-Talamasca.
yeah.
We get a reference to the London Coven. They assume it's the London Coven that have done this because I guess the London Coven, we're in Paris. They're not too far away, so they think that it's the London Coven waging war on them. They don't realize that Louis got out of the crypt.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like, guys, why would you assume it was a London Coven instead of the guy
Well,
whose daughter you've just
England,
massacred?
but English and the French, we have a long history of not liking
Yeah,
each other. So why wouldn't they just assume it was them?
I have to say, I've been to Paris 3 times, and the level of rudeness is staggeringly impressive. Staggeringly impressive. I'm always so proud of the Parisians. Whenever I try and say anything in my halting French, they're like, how dare you speak my language, you English peasant. I love them so much. Um, and then we get a little bit more backstory via Louis on Ben Daniels Santiago, who is, of course, called Francis.
Francis,
Francis.
Francis.
And he does so well about making him so utterly pathetic because he
Yes.
is pathetic. He's a pathetic little man who's been a vampire for 2 seconds, who wanted power but has no idea how to really go about power or solidify power. And, he's a man that's never got anywhere in his acting career. He did a week on the stage as an understudy. Louis mocks him as with all men, for the size of his penis, because these things concern gentlemen, or they concern gentlemen of a delicate nature, which Francis clearly is, because that's all he is at the end of the day, a pathetic little weak narcissist who couldn't cope with Claudia stealing his limelight. And yeah, we get the whole comedy smooth jazz building in the background until Louis provokes him into attacking and then very comfortably cuts his head off.
Yes, before that though, Francis thus Santiago does get into Louis's head a little bit. I mean, obviously by this point, as we've said,
Mm,
Louis is not of sound mind, and anything that he is being given
no.
is just further fuel to the fire. But we get a horrible story about what Santiago has been doing with Claudia's ashes,
Oh no.
which is like, yes, no, he if we didn't already want him dead, we really want him dead by this point.
I mean, that's straight from the books that they use Claudia's ashes as um, makeup and gave it to the audience. And as Santiago puts it, used it as masturbation fodder, but it is horrific. In the books, Armand does completely insane things with Claudia. He kind of reanimates her in a Frankenstein way. I'm not sure they're going to go there here because that's just crazy. I mean, Anne's books, they get progressively crazier and they go on a loop depending on where she was in her life with her relationship with her husband and her journey with religion and herself. They get increasingly more batshit. But yeah, it is grotesque, and you are very much rooting Louis on. I've been rewatching these on Netflix, and I do think it's worth pointing out to people that Netflix do cut little moments. I noticed this on something else. I was watching an episode of The Mentalist, and it's a really key episode in which Bradley Whitford appears. And there's a line that he says in that, which they cut, presumably because they thought it was distasteful. And in this, it's nothing big, but they cut Louis hissing like a cat and meowing.
Oh,
I don't know why, cut for time maybe, but it's not on the one I watched this morning.
but it's Netflix. Netflix doesn't, it's not beholden to time. That's like the whole reason why like television has changed so much, because obviously Netflix can have a 35-minute episode of Stranger Things and then a 3-hour episode of Stranger Things. They don't have to worry about things. Yeah, it's weird because obviously we discussed earlier in the season how they changed the word cunt to
Yes,
something more
bookbinder's
palatable.
wife. It's still a
Yes.
bookbinder's wife instead of still a cunt. And I mean, I don't even know how you get between, like, Lestat could have said anything rather than bookbinder's wife.
Yeah, but I kind of get that because, as we discussed at the time, that word, particularly to like an American audience, and that is quite confronting, and
Mm.
it's not a word that they like to hear. Whereas, the Australians and the English, it's an insult and a term of endearment. But like hissing like a cat, I don't know. Are we scared that the internet's going to turn on them?
Yeah, you speak to an Aussie, they use that word every other 2 seconds. Yeah, no, I was confused by the cat thing, but it definitely wasn't on the one that I watched this morning. Um, so yeah, always worth remembering. I mean, the BBC versions. I mean, we do have the DVDs. Obviously, we have the Blu-rays. Why? How would we ever not have the Blu-rays? But BBC, I hate the little BBC logo in the corner. I don't know why. It just disrupts the flow for me. Um, but yes, no. So Francis is dead.
Hey.
Louis is a hollow shell, and we get beautifully directed shot of Louis and Armand talking with that shaft of light between them, the danger between them, where Armand says, well, basically, I had a choice of my coven of 200 years or him, and I didn't know whether your affection would last that long. Which, correct, it fucking didn't. But that was you were responsible for that. And what I like about Armand is that he really is just rolling with the situation with which he's found himself. He is the ultimate. I mean, Lestat, everyone talks about Lestat as this great manipulator. Lestat isn't a manipulator. He's a fucking idiot. He's well, we said he's Vampire Ken. He hasn't got the
Yes.
ability to plan things out. He just does what he does in the situation and then goes, oh fuck, I better do something about this now. But Armand really is the flying without wings guy. He just improvises the situation. It's like, okay, so well, I did want Louis dead. But now Louis killed all of the coven, so there's absolutely nobody that knows that I'm a baddie. So did I just marry Louis? Yeah, fuck it. Let's just go live with Louis. And this is just what he does. He's like the ultimate improviser. And he says, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. And the one true, like really true thing we hear is Louis saying, you'll never make it up to me.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't, and he never would. How could he? And then we flash to the sequence in Magnus's tower, where we have a very, I mean, Louis so feral, saying you look small is just devastating. Louis. I mean, it's not much of an insult, but it is in that moment. And we have a very obviously distraught Lestat in the tower, mentioning Magnus's last words to him before he turns him. And we get this, well, it's a three-way conversation, but we only hear certain parts of it because there are so many pauses where it's clear that Lestat and Armand are talking to each other. And Lestat is like quite proud of Louis destroying everything in his wake. And Louis is understandably just infuriated with Lestat because at this point, as far as Louis is concerned, Lestat has crossed an ocean to rehearse a play to burn his daughter alive. And so he's got zero time for Lestat looking small or Lestat being scared or anything to do with his tragic backstory in relation to Magnus. And they both decide that they're going to kill Lestat, who is absolutely fucking unbothered by this, wildly unbothered, and tells them that he has the blood of Magnus in them. And Armand quite correctly says, well, Magnus burned. And then he says, it's the first time I think we get the mention, I have the blood of Akasha in me.
Yes.
And I think that's the first time Akasha is mentioned. And it's really interesting that Armand doesn't know who she is. Doesn't seem to, because Lestat specifically says to Louis he doesn't know who that is. And that's when we find out how powerful Lestat is, because he says, basically, I have the blood and Akasha in me, so you can't kill me unless I'm willing. I have to be willing, and I'm not in the mood.
Yeah.
And that's the first time we realize that Lestat is very, very powerful. And that, I guess, by proxy, Louis is quite powerful too.
Yeah. And that Claudia would have been stronger
Yeah,
than your average.
yeah, because if you've got Akasha's blood, no matter how weak, that element is going to make you much more robust and strong. And then we get possibly the most cringeworthy line in the entirety of the show. Even worse. Well, is it worse than Bad Daddy? Not much tops Bad Daddy. But here's your death. As Louis chooses Armand over Lestat. And I'm just like, Louis, you're playing yourself. You do not want this man. Like, you loved him. You had a nice time. You had a summer fling. You are suicidal, half deranged, and you are committing yourself to this man who, even if you don't know, even though he doesn't know yet the depth of his betrayal, still sold him out.
Yeah.
He sold him, Claudia, and Madeline out. And what? We're just going to go home and fuck him for 77 years. You are doing it purely out of spite, Louis. And I respect that, but sometimes spite just puts you in a terrible position, which is what happened here.
Yeah, I mean it probably is more than likely spite, but then also just self-hatred. Like he's obviously still reeling with like guilt in whatever he perceives his part in Claudia's death to be. So he needs to, yeah, atone for that in some way. So why not punish himself by being unhappy? He seems to quite like being unhappy, as we've seen, when she disappeared for 7 years. So why not, keep himself nice and miserable with Oman?
Yeah, so he basically kisses Armand and seals relatively miserable fate. Armand continues to just fail upwards, which again, proud of you, King. Proud of you just failing upwards and improvising and just going along with it. And it's not like Armand doesn't commit to the bit. He's there with him for 77 years. And there is so much looking back and forth between Armand and Lestat in this moment. And Louis like trying to rile Lestat up and saying, whatever pale proxy of me you find to enjoy your miserable life with, I'll be with him. And Lestat is just like, okay, enjoy him. Let's see how long it holds. And of course, it doesn't hold. It's 77 years of absolute beige misery. I mean, I'm sure there's moments of love in between, but it's 77 years with a masterful manipulator and gaslighter who goes around neurotically trying to ensure that Louis' happiness by keeping him from really feeling anything, keeping him from anything true. And then we get the iconic, and that's the end of it. There's nothing else.
But there's just one more thing.
Ah,
I love Daniel's little Columbo moment. I really do.
it's my absolute favorite moment.
If they ever reroute Columbo or, do like a gender swap, like Murder She Wrote or something, Eric Bogosian is your man to be putting in to that role because he's just the delivery of, well, yeah, how about I just got a couple of questions, I missed what you said. So, how many soldiers was it?
I feel like we need to explain to the Gen Zs and Gen Alphas what who Columbo was. He was a detective in the 60s whose famous thing was that the way it worked was that you knew who the killer was from minute one in the episode. And his absolutely favorite thing was that the main thing of the series was that everyone thought he was an abject idiot, and he wasn't. He always knew from the first moment who the killer was. And he'd be almost out the door, and then he'd be like, just one more thing, and come back with a killer question. And what I love is that before he does that, before Daniel comes in with the wrecking ball, which destroys the third marriage, good for you, Daniel. You are consistent there. Armand has the absolute fucking audacity to say, he loved you. I can say that now. He loved you a great deal about Lestat's love for Louis. So you've taken Louis away from Lestat for 77 years. You've kept him because he is Lestat's fledgling and you want to be. And that makes you happy. That makes you feel you've triumphed. And then just as you feel that you have reached the end of like defaming Lestat, you throw in, oh, by the way, he did love you. Yeah, he really loved you. Wow. I mean, where do you even go with that kind of psychology?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point he has realized that everything is about to fall apart. So it's almost like he's trying to get in there
But I'm
first.
like, that's interesting because I'm like, does he? And you're right, because I agree with you that I feel he must know that everything is that he must know that Daniel is up to something and that there is something going on and that he's just like, well, I'm just going to see how this plays out. And so, yeah, he's kind of just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. But like, does he know it's about the wrecking ball's about to come? I don't think he quite does because he doesn't stop Daniel.
Yeah, or maybe he senses the shift in Louis and he's got an inkling that Daniel's up to
Yes.
something. He doesn't quite know
Yeah.
what. So in saying, "Well, Lestat always loved you," that then gives Louis the chance to go, "What the fuck? Well, bye. I'm gonna go and find Lestat." So it's like he can still preserve his secret if he gets Louis out the door quick enough for another reason. So maybe he's thinking that
Yeah.
by telling him that, oh, well,
Yeah.
Lestat, he always loved you, he probably still does, that maybe Louis will be like, right, cool, well, I'm going. I don't care if you've got anything else to say, Daniel. Lovely to see you. I'm off. Um, but obviously that's not what happens because Daniel has got some questions.
Daniel's got some follow-up questions, and I like it because he starts very, measured, very small. So he's like, okay, so, and this is the brilliance of this show. So, like in the second episode of the very first series, like, hey, you you said Lestat was talking to you telepathically, but of course that can't happen, right? He's like, oh yeah, yeah, maybe I misremembered. Just very gently, putting the seeds. Actually, your memory is incredibly faulty, and that there's an awful lot going on here. And then it's like, oh yeah, and you seem to have Sam burying you in the crypt and guarding Armand. He's like, oh yeah, well I wait, yeah, I misremembered. I misremembered. It's fine. I misremembered. Because of course, if he's burying him in the crypt, then there ain't no fucker guarding Armand, because Armand didn't need guarding. And then we get to the soldiers. And it was, I mean, just the ramping up. And I love that Roland Jones had to fight with AMC because they're like, this is too expensive an episode. You have too many extras in this random scene in the first series. You have all of these people. Why? And he's like, no, no, it's absolutely vital. And of course it is. Because he's like, oh yeah, no, he mind fucked 30 soldiers to get out. And then Daniel's just like the most devastating, huh, you've ever heard. He just goes, huh. And you can see Armand by this stage is in an absolute full-on panic. The orange eyes are bulging. And it's like, well, obviously then Lestat could have saved you, right? And then there's a slight follow-up, so I imagine it's very difficult to say in an American accent. That's when you can hear Assad's accent sort of slipping through. Pretty much the only time I've heard it, because he's so good. And then he says, we've been going to the other room for your follow-ups and specious theories. No, Daniel just starts reading out the director's notes from the script. And Amanda's still trying to finesse the situation, even though it's utterly fucked. And again, how can you not respect this king for, even though Daniel has director's notes in front of him in Armand's handwriting, he's still trying to get out of it. And that's when we also get our first sort of linear flashback that no one could have been at. Well, Amanda's at it, obviously, but it's the first flashback that is for the audience alone, because it's where we see Lestat screaming, "You have no idea of Claudia's power," when we see Armand directing the play. Because obviously Armand is not retelling that and Lestat's not in the room. So it's the first time we get a sequence that is just for the audience to understand. Yeah, no, he absolutely 100% incredibly coldly, as Daniel put it, he didn't witness the play, he directed the play.
Yeah.
And he'd been practicing. Because that's the thing. I wonder at what point. I mean, Daniel was never buying that Armand was a hostage. So I wonder at what point he realized that he directed it as he directed everything else.
Mm.
But he was having none of it. I'd have been like, this man is involved. Daniel is like, no, no, he very clearly directed the play. Telemaska, please find me this manuscript. Also, tremendously lucky that this manuscript just happened to be in Dubai.
Yes.
But we'll let that one pass.
Well, I guess obviously they could have. I mean, I guess the Talamasca have obviously got everything digitized, so I guess they could have just like scanned it and printed it. Real Rashid could have scanned it and then I don't know.
Well, of course, in the Talamasca, they made this huge thing, didn't they, about how they hadn't digitized everything. Or no, they didn't they demolish the digitized archives?
Yeah, well, they put it all on. They put it all into the girl, didn't they?
They put it
Um,
all into the girl, which is like the most stupid fucking thing
but
imaginable.
vampires can run really, really quickly, and we know that the Talamasca have some vampires working for them, so
That's
they
true.
just, better than
Zoomed.
FedEx. They just, yeah,
They just zoomed it. Zoomsy zoom. And yeah, I mean, again, just like Daniel in this point is the world's biggest Lestat fan. He's like, you were supposed to die with Claudia. He didn't save you. Lestat did. And it's like, dun, dun, dun. And Louis is not having a good time. Louis is like fumbling through these script pages and realizing, most importantly, 77 years later, the Stats apology was genuine
yeah,
because, of course, he dismissed it in the context because you would, wouldn't you? If your partner is apologizing to you at the same time as he's come over to craft the death of your daughter, you're not going to give a fuck about any single thing he said during the course of that. You're going to think it's absolute nonsense. And of course, he was lying to you. But we get this flashback, and he realizes that, yeah, the stat loved him. The stat was genuinely sorry. I mean, we still have the issue that Lestat never believed that Louis loved him. And Roland, if you do not rectify that soon, you're going to be a sad lady. My heart cannot cope. And we get the brilliant line 77 years based on a seismic lie. But again, was it really based on a lie? Because you just went with him anyway, Louis. You self deluded yourself. I think he just wanted to punish himself because his daughter was dead.
yeah.
He wanted to punish himself, but I think because I've never truly liked the optics of it needed the white savior to show Louis, the truth.
No, I think it's something that he's
He
always known,
knows,
but I
yeah.
think it's
Mm,
it's it's that point of he's been living with the lie so long, he's convinced himself that the lie is the truth, but then he
yeah,
has that niggling thing, that niggling thread at the back of his brain that's like, no, it doesn't quite sound right. And maybe in that first interview, Daniel came close to untangling that thread there. And then that's why Louis got so angry and attacked him because he wasn't ready to confront it then. And then now again, because obviously he could have picked anybody to interview him, but he specifically
yeah.
went back to Daniel for a reason. So maybe, it's like, well, this guy clearly did something the last time. So, because he made me so mad that, I almost ate him. So let's bring him back. And it is that sort of safe space to unpick what he already knew was there. But it's also like when you think something, it's the whole gaslighting thing. You're being gaslit against it. You just want somebody else to confirm that what you are
Yeah.
thinking or feeling is true, is valid. And in Daniel, he has that person that goes, "Oh no, yeah, no." Amon did all of this shit to us in San Francisco, and actually, taking a look further back, you know, your unvoiced suspicions were correct about, what happened with Amon and the trial.
And I think there's a huge element of the fact that Louis has been quite content to live this life for a while because dismantling this lie means, and we see it in the very next sequence, literally blowing his entire life up. It means blowing up everything that he is, the comfort of having that companion, of not being on his own, of not having to face up to the death of his daughter. Because I do feel the thing about having Armand with him is that any grief he's had from Claudia has kind of been, hidden under this comforting layer of, suffocating affection from Armand. So anytime he's sad, Amanda's there. Anytime he's angry, Amanda's there. So Amand kind of, it's almost like an antidepressant, it kind of keeps him from feeling anything at two extremes. That's like when he calls it in the Just Start the Tape episode, he calls it a prison of empathy. And he says that he's been suffocated by beigeness. And it is, being like, actually, you know what? I'm going to blow my entire life up, go live on my own and feel this pain. That's not an easy thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to do. And we've seen in the previous episode where they talk about the pain of vampire loneliness. So for those 70 years, Louis kind of needed like a, I don't know, security blanket, was
Yeah.
prepared to delude himself that actually, while there are clearly lots of things really, really wrong here, it's easier for him to just go along with it, go see Cairo, go see the pyramids, live this life. But then, of course, every now and then, that misery just comes out as it did in San Francisco. So, yeah. And then that's it. That's the end of their relationship. Daniel has quite successfully wrecked his third marriage. And as Raglan is like quite understandably going, get the fuck out, Daniel. The terrible, terrible, awful floating bookcases, which were a sign of Armand's control, get smashed as Louis puts Armand through the wall that they were waiting for Revelation to enter the room. There's no painting on it now because he's put Armand through it. And Assad is so good in that moment because he's so defeated and pleading, and he looks pathetic, but you never forget what an absolute menace he is.
Yes, we've also obviously had them shouting for Rashid, and Daniel was
Mm.
like, "Nah, he left when he dropped that newspaper in, guys. Like, I'm sorry, but your little manservant, he's not here anymore because obviously Rashid is in cahoots with the
Talamasca.
Talamasca."
Yeah. So he's like James Bond, and he's not an idiot. He's like, right, I'm going to give you this, and I'm going to leave before the two psychotic vampires eat me, or rip my head off, or rip me limb from limb. Bye. And so, yeah, he is straight out the door, which is understandable. I would be straight out the door too. And yeah, Louis tells someone to get his shit and fuck off. And then he jumps on a plane and goes to New Orleans.
Well, just before that, he said his goodbyes to Daniel. He
Mm,
has, he's transferred him $10 million. And then Louis sets fire to the laptop because despite being a capitalist king who lives in the modern world, he forgets about the thing called the cloud.
I know. So I was all for the book, and now I fear that I would, as the new series approaches, I'm going to be like ruining the day that Daniel published this book. The effect on my poor baby Lestat psyche is going to be terrible. But yes, he sets the laptop on fire, thinking if he removes the receptacle that his stuff is on, it will go. No, and I mean I get that part of this is, um, Roland Jones is not very tech savvy. I think there was something recently where he said, "I know how to use Dropbox now," and I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
this is adorable." So I feel like he sort of modeled Louis' understanding on that. But yes, no, come on, Louis. It's not on the computer. You can burn the computer. It's still somewhere else. He doesn't understand. And so Louis arrives back in New Orleans, and the difference in the way Jacob Anderson portrays him, like the accent starts to come back. There is a relaxed approach to his body. He starts to wear color again. He's wearing what you would expect Louis to, instead of like the sort of the tech bro blacks, and it was all black, wasn't it? It was all very
mm.
severe blacks. He's now in, athleisure, I guess, in color. He's gone on the crime dog tour where he gets to hear himself being called a Creole hustler with a child bride. and Lestat has become Lysander Leoncourt. And interestingly, in the retelling, Tom Anderson is not a victim, but part of the perpetrators of the crime along with them, because that's the difficulty of the narrative, isn't it? Who tells your story? These things get repeated over time. And so Louis has become a Creole hustler with a child bride in league with Tom Anderson. And when he's there, he sees a rat catcher and he follows him to Lestat. And we get my favorite sequence of the entire episode.
Yes, I mean, I think it's also just worth sort of mentioning just the difference in New Orleans, which just
Mm,
shows, the passage of time. Because when we were last there, it was this vibrant, city that was, bustling with, entrepreneurship and everything. And now, I mean, granted, there is a hurricane warning. I mean, why those people are on that tour if there's a hurricane warning? They really want to know their ghost stories.
they really want to know the ghost stories, yeah.
I went on one recently in York, and we were given serious consideration to not going if it might rain. So the fact
Yes,
that
ma'am.
these people were like a hurricane, yeah, why not go and have a walk around the streets?
I went when I was in New Orleans, I did the Voodoo Bone Ladies walking tour and I loved her. I mean, capitalist queen hanging up the tourists for things she'd made for like a ridiculous amount of money. Just sell your wares, my angel. She was fantastic. But I would not have been doing it in a hurricane or in the rain or if it had been too hot. I'm a very focused individual. It has to be just right. A very delicate soul.
Yes, and the rat catcher, we only see him briefly. Obviously, he's kind of like Lestat's little errand boy, but he does appear in an episode of Mayfair Witches, the second series of that. So we do have a little bit more interconnectivity between the universe. So they definitely, as the show, I mean, they'd mentioned the witches in season
Mm.
one, while they were living in New Orleans. Um, but as this universe has expanded and gone on, they are trying to make the connections tie in a little bit more. So I'm intrigued to see if maybe we revisit New Orleans at any point in season three, whether we might get a few more witches being involved. Because I kind of feel like at some point there's got to be a little bit more crossover, because the fans of one to go to the other, and the easiest way to do that is have a crossover episode.
Yes, which I would spectacularly not want in any shape or form, but we shall see. Um, I think we just have, has how should we put it? One is a set. Let's put it this way: Mayfair Witches is perfect second screen watching, and leave it at that.
We will
Um,
get to it at some point. We will get to it at
we
some
will,
point. We will
yeah.
probably do an episode covering series one and an episode covering series two, because I have seen both of them. There's not quite enough to dig into on an episode by episode basis, but it is perfect. Just so it's not going to emotionally devastate you as much
No.
as the scene that we are desperately distracting ourselves from talking about by going off on a tangent. It is, it's a much easier, sit on the sofa, eat some ice cream, sort of almost disengage brain, and just watch Alexandra Daddario and her beautiful blue eyes, do some witchy stuff. But yeah, they're very different shows. And yeah, we get to the rat catcher. Louis follows him and
And
finds Lestat in a very, very beautiful robe.
yeah, in his very beautiful, very dilapidated gold robe, which is a throwback to the robe he wore the first night that he shared with Louis. And he is in this very reduced circumstances, in this shack, playing on his emotional support plank, which appears to have been carved with his fingers and his blood. And we hear music in the background. And yeah, Louis is coming to see him. And we get rid of the rat catcher pretty quickly because he's just whining in the way that he would, crazy old Frenchman. He wants him to get out of the hurricane, and the stag couldn't care less. And there's a really interesting vibe at the beginning that you're not sure if Lestat thinks Louis is actually there, if Louis is Dream Louis in the same way that it was Dream Stat. But Louis says hello, Lestat, with such incredible affection in his voice. It's such a beautiful sort of comeback to the man that he loves. And they start talking about what they're doing. And Louis says that he is companion for himself for now, which is good because, to be frank, that's what Louis needs. Louis needs
Yes.
to know who Louis is. That's what Claudia always said to him. Who are you outside of me and him? And Louis absolutely does not know that answer at this point. He doesn't, because he has jumped from 30 plus years with Lestat, where he was having to cope with, being a black man in the Jim Crow South, having to cope with, you know, having a husband when he was very closeted previously. That husband being a vampire, the fact that he has to eat blood, and oops, now he's got a daughter. All of that within that sort of very short, for a vampire anyway, period of time. And then he went straight to the tragedy in France, which he's not dealt with in any way, shape, or form. And then he's gone straight into living with Armand for 77 years. And so, yes, Louis needs to go out there, have some fun, fuck a few hundred vampires, just has a nice time. He can love Lestat. He just needs to work out who he is and who he wants to be. And if there is a way that that person can be with Lestat in any form in the future. And Lestat is half nuts. The Siri pause section of this is glorious, where we realize that Lestat's not playing anything. He just
Yes.
has the iPad playing playing his music, and actually, like, the speakers and his top, for as much as he's in a shack, Lestat is actually drowning in designer gear in this section, which is very Lestat, to be kind of punishing yourself by living in a hovel, but also making use of the modern world and the modern things available to him. It was very, very funny. And when Louis moves towards him, what kind of killed me is that Lestat brings the plank in front of him as a defensive mechanism, because he obviously thinks that Louis is either going to hit him or yell at him or anything else. And we finally get this really open, really vulnerable, really honest conversation between the two of them. And I know that a lot of people don't necessarily like this because they think it's, I don't know, too huggy, too sweet, but it is the perfect ending to both of their emotional stories in a way. Like, for Louis to move on and be his own man, he has to come to terms with what Lestat has done for him, and indeed how he didn't help himself during their time together, and then move on. So we have, Louis going, "Did you save me?" He's like, "Well, I gave you to Armand. You tell me if that was saving." Which, I mean, yes and no. He lived, but he wasn't particularly saved in any emotional way. And then, of course, Lestat being Lestat, because he's such a brat, like, "Oh, well, I didn't want to tell you. I don't like to point out my virtues, but you guessed it anyway. Hail me. Yay." But yeah, he guessed it after 77 years. You couldn't have told him at any point. But of course, we still don't know what the conversation in the crypt was between him and Amon. So, but we have this really, 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 really beautiful speech by Louis saying, "I didn't know it was a gift." Honestly, accepting that he tried to make the nights awful for Lestat because he hated being a vampire. He didn't want him to be happy. And then he thanks him for making him a vampire. And the beautiful lines, "For the nights in front of me where I might learn to live honestly." And I mean, again, it's one of those things. It's like Hannibal before it, one of these shows where you cannot conceive that they came to the end of a season and the actors did not walk away with every single piece of hardware imaginable for their performances. Because Jacob Anderson should have had. There are so many Emmy clips in this one episode for Jacob. It's incredible. And this is one of them. I mean, if this had been on HBO, he'd have been nominated for Best Actor every time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really it's a really good scene. And I think it would be different if in this scene they reconciled and then it was like, oh, and they're a couple again. But it's not. This is two people with a really tumultuous history, sort of, reconnecting. There's been an estrangement for, 7 decades, almost 8 decades, like humans don't get that amount of time to process that
No,
from people. And, sometimes things can look better with a lot of distance. It's not like Louis like, okay, I'm going to go and get back with my, abusive ex-partner. It is, he still acknowledges that all of that happened, but he also has to admit his involvement in that and the fact that the worst thing to Louis that he thinks Lestat did, which would, had a hand in, killing their daughter, he didn't. It was, it's not the black and white that he thought it is. And he's kind of going and giving Lestat that opportunity to kind of let himself off the hook a little bit for at least that part of their story together.
yes, because obviously, still at this stage, Lestat saving Louis doesn't entirely, from Louis's perspective, erase the fact that he was, as he still believes at this point, in the play. You know, that he was involved in the play, that he crossed the ocean to be part of the play, that he rehearsed the play. But it's also, I think, a realization on Louis' part that he has allowed rage to subsume him for 77 years. And he took that rage and he sublimated it and he poured himself into this relationship with Armand where he could feel numb, where he could be, kind of like the dom in the relationship and have the control to try and deal with the fact that he had no control over his daughter's death, that he was dragged away, that he was helpless, that he was made to be incredibly helpless in that moment. But none of this has helped him. 77 years of blanketing his rage and trying to be in control of every moment, even though he's not, because Armandez has not helped Louis in any way, shape, or form. So he has to let go of that rage. He has to let go of any rage over Lestat's part in the play and be honest about, how he allowed, that like the 7 years where he just lay on the couch and hoarded and ate whatever came in the house instead of, trying to meet Lestat halfway. And this is all obviously before the domestic violence incident, because after that,
Yeah.
all bets are off. We don't expect Louis to remain with Lestat in any way. Um, but yeah, it's a truly honest, very moving discussion between them, and then we get the absolutely devastating September 8th, 1973. Did you hurt yourself? And Lestat has it memorized down to the moment in terms of the timing. He knows precisely what time Louis walked into the sun. He knows precisely what moment it was because he would have felt it. And Armand contacts him, and he is so raw and so vulnerable and so emotionally open. And I know that Sam Reid hated that line delivery and wanted to redo it, and Roland wouldn't let him. And Roland was absolutely correct because it
Yeah.
is beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And it's so rare to see men on screen be this emotionally vulnerable.
Yeah, it's the way that obviously his voice breaks as he's delivering it, because this is
Yeah.
obviously something that he has lived with in his head since that date without any conflict, like anything from Louis. So I mean, for all he knows, well, I mean, I guess he would feel it, but Armand could have told him anything. He could know that Louis is alive, but he doesn't necessarily know the condition in which Louis is
No.
alive. And there's obviously been festering and fixating on this, and so to see him in front of him, it's just this big emotional outpouring of did you hurt yourself? um and yeah, it's that line that gets me whenever I watch it. It was that line that got me the first time. It almost got me again on the second time. It is, yeah. And then it's it just becomes obviously these two fathers embracing grieving their daughter. It moves on from him saying this to then, the stats saying that he can't get Claudia out of his mind. And, the embrace that people have, some people have an issue with. It's just two grieving fathers, embracing over the loss of their daughter because they haven't been able to do this before.
Yes, because this isn't the end of the story. This is not Louis going, "Hey, Lestat, I forgive you for everything." This is Louis going, "We had a child together. Our marriage was shit. I didn't help in our marriage. You cheated fucking nonstop," which Louis is quite gracious not to point out in this. But it's a recognition from Louis that he was not blameless in the marriage failing. This isn't an apology for the drop. He got that during the trial, and they don't really revisit it here because that's not the moment we're here for. This is the moment of Louis realizing, actually, you know what? I got vampirism. I didn't know how to deal with it. I treated you miserably for years because I was miserable. I didn't know how to deal with this. So it's like almost like a can we start again, but not in a, as you said, let's go back immediately and be husband and move in together. It's like, can we get to a place of, emotional connection where we can work towards over the next few years, getting to a place where we're okay with each other. And part of that is him salving Lestat's conscience over Claudia and saying, it's not on you. I was the one that saved her from the fire. I was the one that brought her in. And then, of course, only for her to be consumed by fire several years later. And the moment, and I think it is a beautiful moment of Louis comforting Lestat. And they were supposed to say things to each other with the mic off. And I don't think Sam Reid says anything back because whatever Louis says, or Jacob Anderson said as Louis in that moment, just immediately has him crying. And it is beautiful. It is two men who have lost their child in the most horrific circumstances, reconciling in that moment, and most importantly, acknowledging their equal fatherhood. Because, as Lestat says, she looked at me at the last minute as a father, but I was never her father. And Louis was like, yes, you were. You were her father. We were both her parents. Shit parents? Yes.
Yes.
Let's accept that. Were we good parents? No. Should Lestat have told Claudia all about the Drake laws and everything about his upbringing and all of this? Yes, but he was too terrified of Armand and therefore ensured that fate played out exactly as he feared. Should Louis have moved them out of New Orleans after the drop? Also, yes. But he didn't. And this is how it goes. He shouldn't have taken Lestat back after the drop. But these things are what they are. But yeah, this is a true recognition that they are, parents who have lost their child in that moment. They come together as the shack blows apart around them. And it is an absolutely beautiful sequence to end that relationship on as we move towards, what it will be in the future. And then we get like a complete tonal shift of Malloy on TV flogging his books. We've had a time shift. The cloud has not destroyed the book. He now has his book out, and everyone is slagging him off because he's sold out and written a shitty book about vampires.
Yeah, because he's written a fictional book. That's
Yeah.
that's the that's obviously what people would assume is that, well, this is just a work of fiction. You're this heavy hitting like journalist, documentarian writer, and oh, now we've done a piece of fiction. What's that about, Daniel?
Yes, because he says you were the best of us before Daniel gets very upset and calls him a hack. It's like, you've completely sold out. And he's like, yeah, I've sold 5 million copies. And I do love that newly vampiric Daniel, as we see immediately, because he takes his glasses off and we can see the eyes. It's like, look, I wanted cash, I wanted fame, I've sold 5 million copies. Hey. And we discover that Armand has done the one thing he said is always distasteful to him, and he has made Daniel his fledgling, which means that Daniel has inherited all of his powers, which is, again, a breach of the great laws.
Yeah.
Bad Armand. Is anyone going to be putting on Armand on trial? I very much doubt it. And we get my favorite piece of music, The Whole World Is Ready to Return by Daniel Hart, which is a stunning, stunning, stunning piece of music. And we end on, a much more emotionally zen, a much more whole Louis. I think that's the thing. By the end of the series, Louis is whole in a way that he hasn't been before. And we see he's put Claudia's yellow dress on the wall, which is an absolute gut punch. He's wearing beautiful, casual, colorful clothing in a way that he wasn't previously. And he, calls out all the vampires who are trying to start shit with him. And just goes, you want to come? Come. I've got security. My windows are always open. Basically, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough, effectively.
Yeah.
And he ends the series with, I own the night. What a fantastic line. Batman could never.
Yeah, and it's obviously it's because the whole series has kind of been him, coming to terms with being a vampire, and he's already told us that he's okay with it now, and that that last line is the confirmation fully of that. He completely owns the night. He owns who he is now, and no one's going to stop him from being him.
Yeah, he has gone from being, you know, the color, the light, everything is back in his life. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. He's still lost his child. He's still trying to work out who he is and who he wants to be, both independently and in terms of whether he's prepared to let Lestat back into his life. But he is a beautiful whole person and is working towards living that honest life in the future, whilst no doubt making tons of money like my beautiful capitalist king.
Yeah, and then obviously when this ended, people speculated what they would do because I think a lot of times with TV series that are based on books and stuff, like maybe the first season or the first couple of seasons will be quite book specific, and then they go
Yeah.
off on a tangent. Looking at something like True Blood, the first season of True Blood is basically each episode is a chapter from the book, like
Okay.
almost like perfectly, I think there's 12 episodes of the first series, there's 12 chapters in the book, each episode covers off a chapter. There's a few like slight changes in terms of characters and things, but for the most part it is the story. And then series two is kind of the same. Series three we start to move on, and then from series four onwards, they occasionally use a bit of one of the books, but it's very
Yeah.
much telling its own story. So I think there was the impression that maybe this would do the same, and then would see Louis taking, center stage and going on with these vampires that are coming against him and that. But obviously, Anne Rice has this whole legion of books, and the second book in that series is The Vampire Lestat, and AMC decided that, let's adapt that, which also obviously has meant that there is now a name change. So going forwards, it is not Interview the Vampire, it is The Vampire Lestat. And, one can only assume, well, I mean, from what we've seen in the trailers alone, it seems like it's going to be a very different story. It's not going to be an interview as such. We know that, Daniel is going to be doing a documentary, and Lestat is on tour and he's got his band, and we might get a redo of Queen of the Damned.
And he's got his muses are haunting him. So it's a very going to be a huge tonal shift, effectively a musical in a way, because you've got all this songs by Daniel Hart, and you can look forward to us as we are gearing up. The show The Vampire Lestat premieres on AMC in the United States on June the 7th. And we will be providing weekly recaps of each episode. Cannot wait to get into the glitter-strewn, debauched world of Lestat and his band.
Yep, as a Queen of the Damned fan, I am looking forward to seeing. You know,
Kesha.
yes, but we'll get into it when we come to cover it. But one of my guilty pleasures is a music biopic. Even if I don't know anything about the band,
Yeah,
I will happily watch it. One of my guilty pleasures is Jeff Tremaine's The Dirt, which is like the Motley Crue biopic movie that he did with Machine Gun Kelly as Tommy Lee. Um, that is on Netflix. I have seen it about 4 times. It's I don't even really I know like five Motley Crue songs, but I fucking love it. It's got Pete
I
Davidson
love
as
their
their like
swag.
manager. And we will get into it at some point because I'm sure that there's bound to be, I mean, they're on a tour, Motley Crue are on a tour. They're rock stars. There's going to be like lots of like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I'm sure
Yeah.
I will be bringing out more on the dirt. But yeah, until then, thank you for joining us
Yes,
through
thank you.
season one and season two of Interview with the Vampire. It has been really hard in places. These last
Hold
couple of
on, my friends.
episodes.
We appreciate your like psychic emotional support.
Yes. And also like your, in-person support, all the people that have, liked, rated and followed us
Yes, thank
across social
you.
media and the podcast platforms. That has been really helpful. We hope that you will, continue to spread the word, especially with, the Vampire Lestat, which we will be doing live. These have obviously been retrospectively, so it's harder for people to find us, but hopefully once we're covering stuff live, there will be, more people to join in the conversation. So yeah, please do continue to give us a like, rating, and follow wherever you're hearing us from, and join us in the very near future as we delve into the Vampire Lestat episode 1, Detroit.